So it's really pretty cool to be sitting here and actually seeing people instead of merely looking at a computer monitor. So I've been a professor for most of my life, and I cultivated being in the classroom and relating to people and how to relate to people. And so 3 years ago, when everything shifted to online, including my own teaching, well, I've been teaching online for a long time, but not using Zoom. And then teaching for Tibetan Buddhism using Zoom became kind of a standard thing. And that was a really difficult transition, because then I had to imagine who this was on my computer monitor that I had a relationship with. And it was okay, but it was a little strange in its own way also, because, you know, when you're teaching in person, there's a relationship of energy and, you know, body language and all kinds of things that happen that don't happen otherwise. So now, of course, we're here together, but you're all wearing masks. So it's still weird, but okay, you know, it's an improvement in its own way. So I can actually see the people on the computer monitor and I can see what they look like, but I can't really see what you look like. But thank you. But I can feel, good, thank you. But I can feel what you look like, or I can feel who you are, but I can't feel who they are. So it's, I don't know what to say about this. It's really a bit on the unusual side. The other thing that's unusual and maybe a little bit interesting is that I first started teaching for Tibetan Buddhism in 2001. And at the time, what that meant was going out to the Surret's property south of town. And then Ira and Sylvia kindly lent us a house to use for our meetings over near the state capitol, which I believe is probably now part of the Inn of the Five Graces. So we met there for a while, and then there were enough people to get together to support actually having a space for Tibetan Buddhism. And we rented a small space off of Cordova. I don't remember what street that was on, but it was near the shopping center there. So we could whip around the corner and there was a nice bakery and cafe. So then I taught there for a while, and then my work took me to Oregon. And then I came back almost 6 years ago and started teaching on, was it 2nd Street? Yes. 2nd Street. So now this is the first time I've tried teaching here in permanent home of Tibetan Buddhism, and it's kind of far out. It's kind of interesting to have gone through all that history and be here now. So you folks online are not quite here now. Maybe sometime you'll have the opportunity to visit. I know Janice and Anil will. I know they're there. At least they were there. Let's see if they're still there. Yep, well, Janice is there anyway. So, okay. So let me get into the talk that I'll be doing this evening. And let me also tell you that we'll meet again in a week. Then the week after that is the 21st. And there is an intensive weekend workshop going on, which I believe Venerable Rabina is teaching. So I'm not going to be teaching that night because I'm hoping some of the people who come to the workshop would come to the 3rd class that I did. And after that marathon, I figured nobody would come. So that will be canceled. But then the last weekend of this month, I will teach. So there'll be 3 sessions altogether. So for those of you that are online, this meeting, 1 more, skip a week, and then back again. So that's what the situation will be. Okay. So the book that I chose to talk about is this one. It's called Becoming Vajrasattva, the Tantric Path of Purification. And I don't know, can everybody see this that's online? Yes? Yeah, thumbs up. Thank you, Sheila. So for everybody else, Tantric Path of Purification. If you don't know this book or you don't have this book, it's really quite amazing. The book itself, it's a transcript for the most part of teachings that Lama Yeshe did beginning in 1974. And then there were some more instructions for retreat that he was giving in 1976. So the first introduction was 1974 in Kopan. And then as he was writing, and as he says in this book, what he discovered was doing Vajrasattva worked really well for Westerners. I think he was figuring out what was working for Westerners, because this was pretty early on in the time that he was teaching. So the 1974 course at Kopan was one of the earlier courses. It's my understanding. So I actually did a retreat with Lama Yeshe in 1976, around the time that some of this stuff was being put together, but unfortunately not in Kopan. I almost went, but it turned out that I didn't. I was living in Bloomington, Indiana, in southern Indiana at the time. And I was getting ready to start my doctorate. It was the summer, and I was getting ready to start my doctorate in Tibetan at Indiana University. And I remember walking down the street, and there's this poster on a flyer someplace about these two lamas who would come to town, and they were going to do this retreat out in Brown County in a campground. And anybody that wanted to come could come. Well, there was Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa. I didn't know who they were. I mean, nobody in southern Indiana knew who they were. But 1974, we were all still hippies, even though I was going to graduate school. And I've been working as a psychologist for about, 4 or 5 years at that point. It didn't matter. We were all still hippies, and people didn't have jobs for the most part. I was getting ready to go to graduate school. So what happened? 20 or 40 people showed up at this campground at Brown County for a week or two, and we did this retreat with Lama Yeshe, which was really wonderful. And then I started graduate school, and he went on his way, and unfortunately I never saw him again. But I remember him quite distinctly as being extremely wonderful. And I remember the retreat as being quite remarkable for quite a number of reasons, not least of which was he married my sister-in-law to a friend of mine, which was kind of unusual. But a lot of unusual stuff happened at that time. So anyhow, there's just a story for you. That's my connection with Lama Yeshe. And then a number of people that I knew got to know him very well in places like Vajrapani in California and so on and so forth. So to the book. I've been wanting to teach from this book for a long time, and it wasn't really on the rota of books that I was assigned when I first started doing this Saturday night course. But I went through the first, or not just I, but everybody went through the first series of books last year. And then I got to choose what I wanted to teach. So this is what I chose. Now, some of you may know that in November of 2021, I did a series of, I believe it was 5 Zoom classes on the psychology of Tantra. And those are the context for tonight's class. I'm not going to review the material that was there. If you're really interested in what I talk about tonight and you're very curious, you could go back and look at those things. They're posted on YouTube, and there are different ways to find them. I think the easiest way to find them, well, the 2 easiest ways to find them are either to go to my website, which is www.komito.com, and look at the series of things I posted. Or you could do a search on my name on YouTube, and those things will eventually come up. So you might want to think about doing that. I thought they were pretty good, and they're a good context for what I'll be talking about tonight. So I know there are a number of people that do Vajrasattva practice. As I understand this morning, there was something called express meditation, which is a purification meditation. I'm assuming that was Vajrasattva. May not have been. Was it? Was that a yes?
I think he usually does it on Saturday.
And that is Vajrasattva.
Claudio.
Was that?
Claudio Ruben.
Claudio? Right. Yeah. But it is a Vajrasattva practice, isn't it? That's what I would have thought, right?
Claudio's with us on Zoom. Hey, Claudio.
Oh, hello, Claudio. Let me see what you look like. I've never met you, Claudio.
Yeah, we've met a couple times.
Have we? Where did we meet?
Over on 2nd Street.
Did we? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that happens when you get old is many things go south, and memory is one of them. So you'll pardon me. But some of the really important things I remember, even if I don't remember everybody that I've met, which is important, but the really important stuff is kind of like this stuff. And mostly I still remember about it, thank goodness. Okay, where I want to begin is where much of Buddhist practice begins, taking refuge. Okay. So there is a chapter in this book called Taking Refuge. And beginning on page 29, Lama Yeshe talks about there being 3 ways to take refuge. So if you've been paying a whole lot of attention to Buddhist teachings, you know that Buddhists are big on numbers. 3 jewels, 4 noble truths, 5 skandhas, 6 sense fields. I mean, well, I mean, it's very practical because, at the time the Buddha was first teaching and early on in Buddhist community life, first couple centuries at least, maybe longer than that, there was no writing. I used to joke with my university students, the Buddha was illiterate, and they thought, this guy is really insulting. This professor is very insulting. Well, the Buddha was literate. Everybody was illiterate. There wasn't any writing. So the way people remembered things was through mnemonics, and all the numbers were helpful ways of remembering things. So you could go through a list. I don't know what 2 was. There must have been 2 truths. Okay. But then the 3 jewels and so on and so forth. So you could remember all of these different kinds of things. Okay. So there are 3 ways of taking refuge. And that's a very interesting way to begin. Because as Lama Yeshe says, there's outer refuge, there's inner refuge, and then there's secret refuge. So he talks about all 3 of these kinds of refuge. So I don't know about secret refuge because if he's talking about it, it's not too secret, is it? But there's a lot of that stuff that used to be considered secret that's now out in the open. So outer refuge is the refuge that we're mostly all familiar with. And technically speaking, the way you become a Buddhist is through the outer refuge. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. You say that 3 times on your knees in front of a nun or a monk, and you're now a Buddhist. So that's where it all begins. And we've all done that many times. If you attend any of His Holiness's online teachings, or if you were fortunate before the pandemic to attend his in-person teachings, and he gives any kind of initiation practice, you're going to take refuge as part of that process. So we've all done that many times. So I'm not so much going to repeat what Lama Yeshe says about outer refuge. We know about that. But then he says, the other 2 ways of taking refuge are tantric methods. Inner refuge is taking refuge in the Buddha you yourself will become. Inner refuge is taking refuge in the Buddha you yourself will become. Now that's a really interesting idea. You're taking refuge in yourself, but you're taking refuge not in your ordinary self. You're taking refuge in your Buddha self. So I'm going to come back to that a little bit because Lama Yeshe talks about that pretty extensively. And he talks about that as a very powerful method for taking refuge that has very powerful consequences. The third way of taking refuge is secret refuge. And he says, this way of taking refuge is the most difficult of all. You have to recognize that your nervous system is pervaded by blissful dakini energy, instead of the usual ridiculous energy of gravitational attachment to sense pleasures. And you take refuge in that. Well, that was his language, ridiculous attachment to sense pleasures, that kind of thing. So let me talk a little bit about first the inner refuge and a framework for understanding the inner refuge and what it might mean and how you might do that and why that's powerful. And I'll try and find some quotes in here from Lama to clarify that, exemplify that. And then secret refuge. And I'll tell that will be the subject matter of this evening. Those three forms of refuge, mostly the other two, second two. In the next chapter here, which is called Inner Refuge and Meditation on Emptiness, which begins on page 31, if you want to track this down. In the second paragraph, he says, as I mentioned above, when we take inner refuge, our mind should become the wisdom of the greatest transcendental bliss and transform into the divine aspect of Haruka. And here, when he says Haruka, he's referring to Vajrasattva and consort. Haruka is a really interesting term. It can mean a lot of different kinds of things. But in this context, it refers to Vajrasattva and consort. So you're taking refuge in Vajrasattva and consort in this practice, and that's the inner refuge. But what does that mean? As a matter of fact, the next line that I've underlined, as he said, to be able to understand this way of taking refuge, we have to understand shunyata, emptiness. Next page, if you do not have a perfect understanding of shunyata through realization, we should at least have a clear conceptual knowledge of it in order to overcome the wrong conception of the way we exist. It is not necessary to search far and wide for what stops you from seeing shunyata. Simply realize that the way you perceive the sense world every day of your life is completely wrong. That's all you have to do. And then you'll understand shunyata. Not very much, just realize that you're utterly deluded and every minute of your life, everything you think, see, hear, smell, touch, and taste is utterly other than what you think it is. Then you're home free. Not much of a challenge, is it? Pardon my humor, but what I chose to do my doctoral dissertation on was Nagarjuna's 70 stanzas on emptiness, Shunyata Saptati. So starting in about 1977, I really got into trying to understand Shunyata seriously. Let's see, 1977 to 2023. How many years is that? That's 23 and 23. 46 years? Is that right? 46. I'm still trying to figure it out. That's intellectually still trying to figure it out. As far as I'm completely deluded all the time, and in every moment, everything I think is actually incorrect. That one still gets me, along with everything I think, etc., see, and so on is incorrect. So let me try and bring this out a little bit more, because it's kind of a radical, I think it's radical stuff. Excuse me. So this is all about inner refuge. The Buddhist scholars have broken down most of Buddhist practice or practices into two basic approaches. One is called the causal vehicle, or all the practices that are associated with sutra, generally speaking, are called causal vehicle. And all the practices, generally speaking, associated with tantra are called result vehicle or fruit vehicle. The other day I heard Bob Thurman use another term that was kind of interesting, goal vehicle. That's not typical, that's very Thurman-esque. I mean, Bob's a great translator and he comes up with very interesting language, but he talked about goal vehicle. I like result vehicle, and that's much more standard. What's the distinction here, and why am I making this point? The practices of the sutra vehicle, in other words, the Hinayana or Theravada practices and the Mahayana practices that are associated with the Mahayana sutras, they're associated with accumulating the causes of your own Buddhahood by doing purification practices, by accumulating merit, by developing understanding. These all become the causes of you becoming a Buddha. Okay, so they're causal vehicle practices. And it's what we're most familiar with. And if you're taking outer refuge, then you're engaged in a causal vehicle practice. So, what is the other possibility? Resultant vehicle, or goal vehicle, or fruit vehicle. Here the idea is, and this is pervasive in Tantric practice, or Vajrayana practice, to use that language. Here the idea is that the seed of your own Buddhahood is already within you. You can't become something that you don't have the seed to become. Okay. An apple tree comes from an apple seed. An orange tree comes from an orange seed. If you want to become an apple seed, if you want to become an apple tree, you have to have the seed of appleness within you. You have to have the nature of appleness within you. You can't have the nature of orangeness or almondness within you and become an apple tree. That's very clear, right? Or as the Buddhist scholars have pointed out, you can't become something, or something cannot occur which is different in character than the nature of the cause of that thing. I didn't phrase that very well. Dharmakirti did a much better job. But like causes produce like results. That's what he was saying. That's what Dharmakirti was saying. If you don't have the nature of Buddha within you, you can't become a Buddha. But everyone can become a Buddha, including my cat, Betty. Every living being can become a Buddha. We've learned about the cycle of life, the wheel of life. I did a class on that some months ago, right? Every living being transmigrates through various life forms. They have some, I hesitate to say essential nature, because essence is a nasty word for someone like Nagarjuna, but they have really some seed nature, their mind stream. And that mind stream that everybody now possesses, every being now possesses, has the potential. It is in the nature of that mind stream to become a Buddha. What did the Buddha do? Well, according to the Sutra tradition, what he did was he spent 3 incalculable eons purifying his mind stream, and that is how he became a Buddha. That's how Shakyamuni became a Buddha. He had the seed of Buddhahood within him. He actualized it. We all have the seed of Buddhahood within us. We haven't actualized it yet. Result vehicles base their practices on that seed, if you will, or on the result, which is potentially already there. You've heard me talking about clear light mind, perhaps ad nauseum. Shayla is shaking her head. I talk about it ad nauseum, pardon my Latin. I talk about it ad nauseum because it's the key thing to understand in Vajrayana practice. And the key thing about result vehicle practices, which Vajrayana practices are, and therefore the key thing to understand about what Lama Yeshe is talking about as inner refuge. This is how all this stuff fits together. Your mind stream at the time you die, pardon me for talking about this, I don't want to be morose about it, but your mind stream at the time you die will have shed all of the coarse aspects of your ordinary day-by-day way of living. Your ordinary sense experiences will no longer function because the sense organs shut down as you're dying. You go through subtler and subtler states of consciousness until you reach the absolute subtlest essence of what consciousness is at the moment of death. That is called the clear light mind. But see, here's the interesting thing. The clear light mind is there right now. The essence of what you are and the capacity to listen to me and be aware of me exists in the fact that the clear light mind is there within you right now, but it's obscured by the coarser levels of mind. This is Tantra or Vajrayana 101 to understand this. So, if it's there right now, you can depend upon it right now if you can find it. Of course, that's the hard part, finding it. So how do you find it? Well, that's why we have these images. These images are you in your perfected nature, not as clear light mind, but as Sambhogakaya, a perfected level of mind, but they're there within you now, and you can depend upon them sort of like targets, right? So let me take the example of archery here. There are different ways to think about hitting the target with the arrow in archery, probably with other forms of martial art too. I practice archery. I don't like guns, so I'm going to use the example of archery, right? The way Westerners think about hitting the target in archery is by, there's the bullseye. I'm going to aim for the bullseye. Am I going to get it? Maybe, maybe not. The way the Japanese practice archery, my understanding, not that I've had a teacher who's taught me this, but I've read this, is they try to avoid everything that's not the target. That's a different way of practicing. But the main thing is, whether you're avoiding what's not the target or trying to hit the target, you've got a target that you're aiming for. And you know what it looks like, and you know where it is. So you know how tautly to pull the bow. You know how high to aim, because of course the arrow goes like this. The arrow goes like this, for those of you that are online. It doesn't go straight, right? You need to know what's going on with the wind. So if the wind is blowing at a certain intensity from your left, right, you have to aim into the wind a bit. Because as the arrow goes forward, the wind will push it to the side. So these are all the ways that you hit the target. Right? These images are guides to the target. The target is clear light mind. The images are the guides. When you take the inner refuge, as Lama Yeshe is talking about, when you take the inner refuge, you're taking refuge in the clear light mind, which is there in you right now, but you can't really find it. So you need help. You need a guide for finding that target. And the images are the guide. So Vajrasattva as an image is like that kind of a guide for the target. Now, as Lama Yeshe said in one of these quotes that I made, or one of these quotes that I read, the wisdom mind takes the form of Vajrasattva. And that's what you're taking inner refuge in. Pardon my terrible grammar. Let me read that passage again if I can find it. Back to page 31. As I mentioned above, when we take inner refuge, our mind should become the wisdom of the greatest transcendental bliss and transform into the divine aspect of Haruka, Vajrasattva. That's what he's saying. The transcendental bliss that he's talking about, the divine wisdom that he's talking about, is the ability of the clear light mind, which is your actual Buddha nature when you've realized it. It's the ability of that clear light mind to know the truth of what's going on. And when you're taking the inner refuge in Vajrasattva, you're taking refuge in the image of that mind, which is there as a way of supporting your access to that clear light mind. So does this make sense? Is this too out there? Is that a yes? Yep, that's a yes. That's a yes. Is that a yes out there in Cyberland? Yep. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Yeah, thumbs up is really helpful. I appreciate that. Well, you know, I can't teach without feedback. So yeah, hold on a second. I can't teach without feedback. So, well, I mean, I can, but then I would be just abstractly pontificating, and who cares about that? So, you know, so I need to check in every once in a while. So yeah, you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a
Hold on a second. Go ahead.
Is the clear light mind the same as a Kundalini rising?
That gets us, okay, the question was, is the clear light mind the same as the Kundalini rising? That gets us into the secret refuge. So let me hold off on that, answering that question until I get into the secret refuge, okay? There's a question from Cyberland. From Aaron to everyone, okay. That is what I was about to ask. Okay, Aaron. So good. Two people have the same question. All right. All right, let me get my train of thought back. So the basic practice with Vajrasattva from the framework of, or in the framework of understanding the inner refuge, okay, is, well, I mean, there's a detailed practice that is described in the text here, but I'm going to give you the thumbnail view, or in college it was the Cliff's Notes view. You remember Cliff's Notes? Yeah, the Cliff's Notes view of how to do this. They were little yellow books, weren't they? Yeah. I never took any courses that Cliff's Notes had Cliff's Notes for, which always seemed kind of unfortunate. So I was always busy scribbling like crazy. Ruined my handwriting as bad as it was. Undergraduate school ruined my handwriting. Mostly from taking notes. All right, so the way the practice works for the most part is you begin by imagining, and you do imagine, and imagination is powerful. Maybe I'll do a sidebar on imagination in a minute. You imagine a white lotus developing on the top of your head, and on top of that, white hum, then a white vajra. The white vajra turns into Vajrasattva and consort. They're embracing each other. The male side holds vajra or dorje in the right hand and a bell, usually in a cross position. Could be like this, different ways to represent it. The female side is embracing him, sitting in his lap, holds what's called a chopper or a curved knife and a skull bowl with red substance in it, usually considered blood. That's how you know that this is a tantric practice, by the implements that they're holding and the fact that you have these two figures in this relationship. You imagine light coming out from Vajrasattva's heart, from the hum at Vajrasattva's heart, and bringing in Vajrasattva, the real Vajrasattva, as it were, from outside. They merge. There's some blessings that go on. Then you recite the mantra, and you imagine nectar streaming down from Vajrasattva through your head into your body. And you can imagine various kinds of purification that go on at that point. There are different ways to do this, and we'll get into all of this kind of stuff later. But generally, the nectar is driving out the negativity in your body. Now, is this really happening? Is Vajrasattva really sitting on your head? I mean, I've never seen anybody with a little Buddha sitting on the top of their head, right?
Energetically.
I can't hear.
Energetically it is.
Okay, so that was the comment. Energetically it is. And that gets us back again to the secret refuge aspect, right? But back to imagination. So one of my teachers is a Drepung Geshe Rinpoche called Zachoje Rinpoche. I've been really fortunate that I've had 3 Rinpoches from Drepung who've been my teachers, and they've sort of handed me off to each other as they pass away. One passes away, I get handed off to the second one. That one passes away, I get handed off to the third one. Given our age difference, I'll probably outlive the third Geshe. I'll probably outlive Zachoje, and I'm not quite sure what that means for who's teaching whom in the future. I'm sure I'm not going to be teaching them, but maybe I'll go back to Tartopia when I'm reborn. We'll wait and see about that. And I won't even know that that has happened. But anyway, it's always seemed strange to me that maybe when I'll be reborn, you know, when I'm a young person, I'll find these books written by this David Komito dude, or these YouTube videos, see this David Komito person, and I'll be a total stranger to myself. but maybe I'll be able to say something useful to myself. I mean, it's kind of a funny world we live in that way. Anyway, that's all an aside. Back to what Zopa Rinpoche was saying. So some people think imagination is kind of like what is all this imagination stuff, you know? It's imaginary. I mean, how can you base a spiritual practice on something imaginary? He said, we're imagining things all the time. Imagination is not something that we just deploy when we're doing spiritual practice. We have our imaginations running 24/7. It's the way we exist in the world. We're always imagining things. Everything that's going on around us, we're imagining. And so if you're imagining Vajrasattva, is that unusual? What's unusual about it? You're still using your imagination, but you're using your imagination productively instead of maybe destructively, right? I mean, if you wake up in the morning, like I do, if you wake up in the morning and you think about all the stuff that you need to do during the day, well, the future of what you're doing during the day hasn't shown up yet. I have things in my house that I have to fix or clean, right? And I'm laying in bed in the morning thinking about that. I'm imagining them. I'm imagining at the moment the humidifier in my heating system that isn't working. When I'm thinking about fixing it, I'm imagining it. And that's the first thing I'm doing in the morning when I wake up. We're always imagining stuff. Okay. So here's a productive use of the imagination. But is it imagination of nothing at all? Is it complete fiction? Well, no, it's not a complete fiction because of a couple of things. One is what you're imagining is your wisdom mind in the form of Vajrasattva on your head. Well, your wisdom mind already exists. You just haven't been paying attention to it. So now you're paying attention to it. You give it a form, you put it on top of your head. Now you're paying attention to it. It's always been there, right? And speaking energetically, right? That energy, that wisdom energy was always there within you, kind of a little bit maybe. And now you're giving it some more attention. Now it's bigger, you know, so it's always there. Okay. In a funny way, you're kind of playing a game with yourself. This is the way I've always felt with Vajrayana practice. You're playing a little bit of a game with yourself. What kind of game am I talking about? In most forms of deity yoga, which is the main practice in the Tibetan version of Vajrayana, in most forms of deity yoga, you begin by imagining a Buddha in some form outside of yourself, maybe in front of yourself, maybe on top of yourself. And then it merges with you. For example, if you're doing guru yoga, which is fundamental, you start out by imagining your Lama in front of you at the level of your forehead or your third eye out there. And you offer praises and offerings to the guru, and you develop some feeling for the guru from the Lama. And then the Lama comes to the top of your head and dissolves into you, and the two of you become one. So here Vajrasattva is on the top of your head. The nectar is coming down to purify you. And at the end of the practice, Vajrasattva and you become one. Well, it's not like Vajrasattva and you were ever two. It's just you don't know that you and Vajrasattva are one. So you start off with your deluded notion that Vajrasattva and you are separate, and then you become one. Why do we do it that way? So here's a little bit of a sidebar, I guess, into Western ways of thinking. The way our minds function, besides the fact that they're dualistic, the way our minds function is sometimes they function in what Gregory Bateson called analog ways of thinking, and sometimes digital ways of thinking. So I talked about this fairly extensively in those 5 lectures that I did on psychology of Buddhist Tantra that I referenced in the very beginning. But what did he mean by this? So on the wall back of us, there's this clock, which currently says 15 minutes to 6. Okay. And the way the clock works, we all know this because we're old enough. But if any young people happen to listen to this lecture who don't know about clocks, the way it works is it has a dial, it has hands on a dial that go around like this, right? And as they move through the various hash marks and numbers, that's how you know what time it is. So there's a small hand, which is approaching the 6, and there's a large hand, which is a little bit past the 9, right? And that tells me that it is 46 minutes after 5, or it is 14 minutes to 6. The hand moves smoothly. The hands move smoothly across the dial. Now, Bateson says, contrast that with a digital clock, like my now that's interesting. Okay, hold on a minute. Okay, there's a digital clock. It's numbers. Right now, the numbers say 548. If we look at it long enough, we'll see the 8 changes to a 9. That's discontinuous. Here's this flow in the analog clock. And here's this discontinuous transition of numbers 7, 8, 9 in the digital clock. This is the distinction between analog and digital ways of thinking about things. What I just noticed that was amusing to me was the icon for the clock that I just showed you on my cell phone is a little circle with hands in it, right? Okay, well, what is the point that I'm trying to make here? Without being boring about this, the point is that analog ways of thinking use an image aspect or an image making or an image using aspect of the mind. Digital ways of thinking, which are discontinuous, are in a sense more logical. They're more like A plus B equals C, something like that. And analog ways of thinking are like more associated with the subconscious mind. Freud was big on this. He called them primary process modes of thinking. And digital modes of thinking, to use that language, are more associated with the rational mind, or for us, the conscious mind, because we're more rational, college-educated type people for the most part, okay? But we have those two minds within us all the time, going on all the time. So what Vajrayana is doing is making use of the analog mind, which is more associated with the unconscious, or with poetry, or with visual arts, right? So these images, Buddha, Manjushri, Avalokiteshvara, right? They're ways of accessing that analog mind, or they're using the analog, let me be more proper about this. They're ways of using the analog mind to access the deeper mind. That's what I was really trying to say. Okay. So when we meditate Vajrasattva on the top of our head, or we go through this practice of taking what's outside and bringing it inside, and we're playing this game, right? What's happening, from my way of understanding things, is the analog mind, the mind that's much more associated with our subconscious or our unconscious, is going through a routine to remind itself that what appeared to be outside is inside. Rationally, I could say, oh, it was always inside, but rationally doesn't work for my unconscious mind, right? What works for my unconscious mind? Images, right? And ritual or theater. So this is like theater, this is ritual. You bring the image from outside inside. It's not that Vajrasattva was always outside. Vajrasattva was always inside. So this is, as I like to say sometimes, a game or a ritual that you're playing with yourself. The same thing for Guru Yoga, which is where it gets really interesting from my point of view. The Lama seems to be outside, but with Guru Yoga, you bring the Lama inside and you recognize that the two of you are one. Well, it's not like Aratoku and I are one person. He had his personality and he didn't speak English. And I have my personality and I don't speak Tibetan. I may have read scriptural Tibetan and he may have read scriptural Tibetan, but we're radically different people. And yet the essence of him and the essence of myself are the same. So when I imagine my connection with him and our becoming one, all I'm doing is reminding myself of the truth, that the essence of he and the essence of myself are one. Of course, he was more developed than me. So when I practice in that way, I'm also, this is effect vehicle Buddhism, I'm also depending upon that which I myself can become eventually. I mean, theoretically, eventually I could become as developed as my lamas in 500 lifetimes or something, you know. But you get the general idea. So the same thing, we're playing this kind of game, if you will. I'm reiterating this over and over because it's important to understand it. We can say, well, I'm using my imagination. Why does this matter? How is this real? What is this doing, right? Well, the imagination is mobilizing a technique, if you will, for communicating a truth to ourselves in an analog language. Okay. So that's very important for understanding Vajrasattva practice. It's very important for understanding any Vajrasattva, any Vajrayana practice, any Tantric practice, is that this is always what's going on. Okay. Now, so I've talked about a little bit about outer refuge. And I talked a little bit now about inner refuge. So now let me talk about secret refuge. And let me see if I can find some quotations about this. Before talking about inner refuge, secret refuge, Lama Yeshe talks a lot about shunyata. And why is it important to understand the place of shunyata, emptiness, theory of emptiness, or the reality of emptiness in this practice? So if I were following the line of his discourse, that's what I would be talking about at this point. But the question has come up about energy from you. And what is your name?
Kodo.
Kodo. Kodo.
Kodo.
Kodo. Okay. And also somebody, I lost track of who it was, asked that question in Cyberland. So let me go to secret refuge now. And the next time we gather here, or we gather here in cyber connections. I'll come back a little bit to the importance of shunyata in this whole process. Secret refuge, as you've already given away, is about understanding the inner energies and how one relates to them. Let me see if I can find what Lama Yeshe has to say about that. That's a way of jumping into it. So I'm going to jump over everything he has to say about bodhicitta and about shunyata. At the end of this chapter, he talks about the 9-round breathing exercise. Do people know what the 9-round breathing exercise is? Was that a yes? Yes, 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 yes. No, no. Okay. Let's see what's the best way to get into this. Okay. Here's the best way to get into it, I think. In the Vajrayana view, our consciousness, like our clear light mind that I've been talking about, has 2 aspects, if you will. Now, these 2 aspects are the subject of considerable debate. Not everybody in the Buddhist tradition agrees about what these 2 aspects are and how they relate to each other. But we could say, using our Western language, that the 2 aspects are the form aspect and the energy aspect of our consciousness. That's a little weird thing to say, because one of the definitions of consciousness is it doesn't have any form. But I hesitate to use the word substance, because that's another problematic term. But anyhow, I'll use it. So our consciousness has the aspect of knowing, being aware, but it also has an energetic aspect. And the way the Tibetans, at any rate, talk about it is they say that the relationship of consciousness and the inner energies, if you like Freudian terms, maybe you could call it libido, or you could call it prana, or you could call it shakti, or you could call it chi, and the East Asian systems of martial arts. This inner energy is like a horse, that the consciousness is like the rider upon, horse and rider. So what you think or where your energy, what you think or where your attention goes is where the energy goes. The rider directs the horse carries the rider. So, and we've all had this experience, if you have too much coffee in the morning or too much sugar in the middle of the day and your mind goes crazy, goes wild, and it gets carried around, and like you get frenetic in your thinking, that's the horse carrying the rider around. Okay. So on the other hand, you can focus your mind in certain ways, and the horse will go, or the wind will go, where the focused mind wants it to go. This is the relationship between these 2 aspects. Now, some Buddhist teachers will say that the horse and rider are 2 aspects of the same thing. The consciousness and energy are 2 aspects of the same thing. Others will say they're not 2 aspects of the same thing. When I've asked all of my lamas about it, they've all said there are different theories about this. They never answered is it the same thing? Are they 2 things? So they always said the same thing. No. there are different theories about this. And then they wouldn't say anything more about it. And they made it clear that they weren't going to listen to any more questions on that subject from me. Okay. I thought that was a particularly honest way to approach the problem. Anyhow, from our point of view, what matters is that there is a relationship between what we experience as our inner energetic life force, whatever you want to call it, and our consciousness and our thoughts. The reason for doing the 9-round breathing exercise, which Lama Yeshe describes in this chapter, is because what that does is it begins to modulate or harmonize the physical breath. And when the physical breath moves in certain ways, the energy moves with the physical breath. The prana or the chi, whatever you want to say, moves with the physical breath. And as it moves, so the consciousness moves. So one way of dealing with your mind, which is flailing all over the place, thinking about the humidifier in my heating system that isn't working when I first wake up in the morning, is to do the 9-round breathing exercise or any other kind of breathing exercise. And it brings the energy into kind of a harmony. Now, Lama Yeshe says something very interesting here. He talks about the fact that the energy flows through the body through certain channels. And those channels can be visualized or imagined, whatever you prefer. Usually, the way that they're described, excuse me, usually the way they're described is there are 2 channels, one on the left side of the spine and one on the right side of the spine, in front of the spine, not the side really, but in front of the spine. Usually imagined as white on the left, red on the white, red on the right. That's the mnemonic, red on the right, right? And they go from the nostrils up like the handle of an umbrella, as they say, down to just below your navel, but remember, toward your spine, where they then curve inward to the base of your spine, where they meet another channel, which is blue in color, and it rises up in front of your spine to the top of your head. Okay. So in the 9-round breathing exercise, you breathe in through, now Lama Yeshe says, starting at the left side, the white side. My own teacher said, starting on the right side, the red side. It's obviously arbitrary. Well, maybe that's a bad word. Let's just say there are different ways of doing it. But anyhow, you breathe in through one side, a count of, say, 9 in my case. I like the 9s. You hold the air below your navel for a count of 9. You release the left side for a count of 9. You do this 3 times, then you do it on the other side 3 times. Excuse me. Then you breathe in both sides, both channels from the side, from the nose, nostrils. And then you hold it again for a count of 9, and then you release the air up the central channel. You imagine that happening. Use your imagination. Lama Yeshe says it's important to see the channels. He says, this is on page 41, concentrate fully on the passage of the air through the channels, letting your mind become one with the movement of the air energy. Don't think about what your neighbor is doing or anything else. Remember, these are retreat instructions, or, this is a kopan rather. And there's a group of people who are practicing that. Don't think about what your neighbor is doing or anything else. That's why he says that. Do not regard your channels as physical, made of flesh and blood. Remember, you are visualizing yourself in the pure aspect of the deity, and the channels are in the nature of consciousness. But since you are not holding the divine pride of being the deity, you can still purify the delusions as I have described. So let me talk a bit about what he means in this passage. And there's several things that are wrapped up in here. First off, it's important to recognize that the image that you have of the channels, on the one hand, is energy, but on the other hand is consciousness, right? Because consciousness and energy always go together, right? So that's what he's emphasizing. So the channels are consciousness energy. And so when you're imagining the wind, the physical wind moving through them, you're also imagining the subtler energy moving through them, which means you're also imagining your consciousness moving through them. And that's why it's important to see the channels and to see the wind energy moving through them, because then the energy moves through them, the consciousness moves through them, something is actually happening. Not physical, he emphasizes that. It's not physical, but something is happening. Then you imagine the wind coming up the central channel. That means everything merges. And in the central channel, the experience that you have in deep meditation, when the subtler energies enter the central channel, that the physical world around begins to, I won't say dissolve, but to become less tangible, less solid, because you're indrawing, you become more introverted. And even though the external world is there, the sense world is there, it's less relevant. It's still there, but you're not wrapped up in it, right? And this is one of the ways in which the purification process is going on that Lama is talking about, because the distractions that exist in the external world don't have their grasp on you in such a firm way when things are withdrawing inside. Okay. Now here's another little bit of a sidebar. In Deity yoga, it's usually said that there are two main levels of practice, what are called creation stage practice and completion stage practice. In creation stage practice, you're mostly focusing on the clarity of the deity image or the bodhisattva image that you're working with, and you're taking the divine pride of I am that. Those are the main things that you're practicing with in creation stage practice. I am Avalokiteshvara. I see myself as Avalokiteshvara. But in completion stage practice, you're working with the inner energies that are associated with those images. So first you work with the image, and when you have clarity with the image, the inner energies begin to move. In fact, they take the form, from my experience, in fact, they take the form of the deity bodhisattva image that you're working with, and the feelings and the emotions that might be associated with them. Or I would say more properly, that the nature of the consciousness that's associated with the image begins to pervade you, right? So if you're meditating Avalokiteshvara, Avalokiteshvara is the object of your consciousness as you're imagining Avalokiteshvara. But I mean, the basic principle in Buddhist thought is subject and object consciousness and an object always come together, right? So if the object is Avalokiteshvara, what is the consciousness that's associated with it? Compassion. If the object is Manjushri, what is the consciousness associated with it? wisdom, right? So all the practices are like that. But in particular, one of the things that happens in completion stage practices is that the energies accumulate in the central channel. The energies which are ordinarily going outwards through our sense organs are drawn inwards through this practice, and the energies accumulate in the central channel. And you can literally feel this happen, because when your practice gets strong, when you have the strong sense of I am the Bodhisattva figure, the deity that you're working with, and you see that figure clearly in your imagination, you'll feel your spine get erect. And you'll feel the energies drawing in, accumulating in the central channel and rising. Or descending, because they do both. They rise and they descend. So now in Vajrasattva practice, what are we doing? Now, Lama Yeshe is recommending that you imagine yourself as Vajrasattva and then do the 9-round breathing exercise. And imagine the channels and imagine the winds moving through the channels. I don't happen to practice that way, but that's what he's recommending. Okay, how does this relate to the secret refuge? Okay. If you're doing the inner refuge, you're taking refuge in the image. That's like taking refuge in the rider of the horse. If you're doing the secret refuge, you're taking refuge in the energy side. It's like taking refuge in the horse. What was that?
The rider.
The rider, taking refuge in the rider is like the inner refuge. Taking refuge in the horse is like the secret refuge. Did I screw that up before? I did. No. Okay. Alex says I didn't. Kay said I did. It doesn't matter. We're clear about it now. Okay. All right. So you're not taking refuge in a horse. You understand the metaphor, right? You're taking refuge in your inner energies, which are, in a sense, very tangible, which you can feel, right? So really, ideally, you do all three. You do the outer refuge, you do the inner refuge, you do the secret refuge. So they're triple powerful. It's like someone once said, it's like someone described me as a triple threat guy. That's a baseball term that I don't understand. But this is a triple threat practice, I guess. I don't know where that came from. It just occurred to me. Sometimes thoughts come through my mind and I say things I don't even know where they came from or why I'm saying them. Anyhow, there it is. So that's the inner refuge, right? You practice with the inner energies and you take refuge in the inner energies. But what is the inner energy that you're really taking refuge in? At one level, it's your wisdom mind, which has an energy which you can experience. At another level, you're taking refuge in the energy of the clear light mind, your own Buddha nature. That's what you're really taking refuge in. Whether you're taking refuge in the consciousness of your clear light mind, or you're taking refuge in the energy aspect of your clear light mind, that's what you're taking refuge in. And if you're doing the outer refuge of I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha out there, that's like in the Vajrayana point of view, it's like, okay, the outside, because that's what your course mind is into. You take refuge in what's in the outside, but really you're taking refuge in the clear light mind of the Lama. Even if you think of the Lama as out there, you're taking refuge in the clear light mind of the Sangha. Even if you think of the Sangha as being out there. When you're taking refuge in the Dharma, what's that? Well, that's the teachings that have come through the Buddhas and all of their disciples and the great teachers in the form of language, but that's the wisdom mind in the form of language, and you're taking refuge in that. It's all the clear light mind. It's all the same thing. It's all Buddha. It's all Buddha nature. Different ways of seeing it, talking about it, understanding it at different levels of coarseness and subtleness, but it's still all the same thing. And when you're practicing with Vajrasattva, that's what you're practicing with. Right? And so what are the nectars that come down from Vajrasattva when you're practicing? It's those energies. They're coming down from the top of your head down through your body, and they're purifying you. So we'll talk more about this next week. But that's kind of the overview. I mean, that's kind of the whole thing, actually. But, you know, since there's going to be 3 classes here, I have to talk about more stuff. Okay. So that's kind of what I wanted to say tonight. And we have theoretically 15 minutes left. And I'd be glad to take any questions. And if there aren't any questions, I'll be glad to enjoy your company and drink a cup of tea. So where are we at? No, yeah, question.
The 9 rounds.
Why don't you take your mask off so I can hear you? Take your mask off so I can hear you. Thank you.
The realms are these like different sub-bodies or parts of the sub-body? What's it? Can you define the word realm? Or it's nine what?
The word is rounds, not realms.
Rounds.
9 rounds, like 1 round, 2 rounds, 9 rounds.
So I go around, so I do it 9 times. I go around.
9 times on, yeah, right. 3 times on the left, 3 times on the right, 3 times in the middle.
Awesome.
Okay, I'll demonstrate this next time. All right. Yeah,
I was gonna ask, could you take us through that?
I can't hear you through the mask.
Oh, sorry.
So everybody in Cyberland understood that we had a misunderstanding. He heard 9 realms rather than 9 rounds, and that's where the question came from. What are the 9 realms? There are actually 9 realms, at least in the Bon teachings. I don't know about the Buddhist teachings, but I don't know about that stuff. Your
I
question.
was just wondering if we could do a 9-round breathing exercise now, with you taking us through it.
Yeah, okay, we could do that if you'd like to do that. Sure. All right. So Lama Yeshe has complete instructions in here, but we can do that together. You'll have to do it with your masks on because that's what's supposed to happen in the Gompa. So that's kind of hard. I understand it's hard. I take 3 karate classes a week. They go on for an hour and I'm wearing a mask as I'm jumping around the room and doing all. It's a pain. But, you know, it's what we do to take care of ourselves and each other as we wear masks, because we don't know what kind of things we're carrying around these days. So I don't go to a grocery store without wearing a mask. And so the protocol here at Tibetan Buddhism is you wear a mask and a gompa, except for the teacher, because I guess everyone wants to see the teacher, and besides which I couldn't possibly talk to you through a mask. Okay, so here's the way it works, and you'll have to do this through your mask. So you want your feet flat on the floor because we're sitting on a chair. And I'll do this the way Lama Yeshe does it or teaches it. And next time we meet, I'll show you another way of doing it that my teacher showed me, and I'll also show you the base breathing exercise, which is a whole other kind of thing. Okay. So the simple way is you start out by blocking one nostril, and you're going to breathe. Actually, it's done like this. I'm sorry, with one finger. Thank you. Wait a minute. So you block, let's say your right nostril, and you breathe in through your left nostril, and let's count 9. And you imagine the breath coming up through your sinuses, up to the top of your head, down through a white channel on the left side in front of your spine, down to your navel, just below your navel. And then you hold it there for, say, the count of 9. And then you switch and you put your finger on the other nostril and you exhale for the count of 9. So let's just do that one, okay? In the left, hold, and out the right. And again. Okay, now we reverse, and we'll go in through the right, breathe in through the right, and out through the left. So red channel, out through the white channel. Now we're going to breathe in through both nostrils, and we're going to breathe out. But when we breathe out, after holding the breath, we're going to imagine that the air is coming out the top of your head, not out your nose. I mean, the air will go out your nose, but imagine the energy going out the top of your head. Okay? Now, that should have pacified your mind a little bit. It always works for me in the morning to do that. And of course, you can do that more than just 3 times on the left, 3 times on the right, 3 times in the center. You can do it as much as you want. If your mind is really crazy, you might do it quite a lot. If you pay real close attention, you can feel things moving around in your body besides just the air. But that might take a little while if you're not used to doing this practice. But that's it. It's really very simple. It is very simple. Where it gets more subtle and more complicated is when you start remembering things like the channels are made of consciousness energy and that their nature is emptiness, which will be where I begin next Saturday night. Okay? All right. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here. It was really wonderful after 3 years of COVID and only teaching online to be able to meet with people. And thank you for folks who tuned in Cyberland through Zoom. It's not quite the same as meeting with you, but I'm glad you're here and thank you for coming. So Blessings to all of us. And we'll be back again, some of us or all of us, in a week. Okay. Dedicate the merit. Let's dedicate the merit of this practice to our own development, that we all become Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and in so doing, can be a benefit to this world that we live in, which is so full of misery and suffering. And alleviate that in some tiny little bit through our own wisdom practice and our own interactions with people and other beings because of our own development. Maybe I'll talk about some of that next week too. All right. But thank you for reminding me.